Now, last one, the one that you got. Full spec Bard. This is the build I do not recommend for new users. The reason why is because, think about it this way. So the reason why I took a lot of time explaining this section and this section, the high swift build, is to understand what happens if my swiftness goes lower. So if you have swiftness up to 600 with low level gems, it's 18 seconds. You're gonna have so much, you have so much empty time frame to a point that by the time you give your shields, the guy would probably be dead. And DPS players notice that they're actually using more pots because sometimes they don't know that they get hit so much, because most of the time if you play with a good support, they're shielded most of the time. Therefore, they think that they're playing good, but the support's actually giving them so many shields to a point that you don't know that you're getting hit. That's why I don't recommend it at all. But let's talk about the pros first. This is the fastest 3 bubble generation. So they actually take a different set of skills too. This is based on how much identity gauge is by ranked on skills. So number 1 is Prelude of Storm. And then you have Wind of Music and there and so forth. These are not important. But the Sonatine is doing just as much as Wind of Music does. This Sonatine skill is very good. Like, some people are saying it's bad. I think it's a really great skill. So if I use Wind of Music, so check my identity bar, it feels about this much. Yeah, even though it doesn't seem that much, it's actually a lot. But if I use Sonatine as well, to me this looks exactly the same, or a little more, right? Who knows? And the skill itself has destruction on it, so it kind of helps to your lack of destruction on Bard, and also a little bit of stagger too. And it's a marking skill. So all this stuff is gathered into one to kind of fortify the weaknesses that the Bard had. But the requirement is having the full tripod for it. Putting that in mind, since Spec Build's job is fastest 3 bubble generation, right? As you see this here, Wind of Music is a little different, right? So we call this Buang Buang. And what it does is it generates a lot of meter. Regular is about this much for full spec, right? Buang Buang version is this much. It's so much more, right? Now, don't get fooled. You have no shield carry in this build, except the Guardian Tune, which lasts 11 seconds. If you play, you have to ask if you want to play this build, because your DPS is going to die. If your party mate is my friend, someone like Zeal's Ambition, who loves that DPS, this is the build. That's why we have separate builds. That's why players like me, you can gather all that bubble so fast and then give that 3 bubble buff to a player that you want to give buff to. For example, like an artillerist. Wine Blue said it takes about 10 to 12 seconds. You can fit 3 bubble in there if you actually rotate really well. I mean, obviously the boss is going to move around, but you can try to fill it up as fast as you can, right? Fast as you can, right? But this is a real fun and support. How much can I squeeze in? How much can I squeeze in all this identity gauge to give that 3 bubble before my party mate initiate his burst, right? That's how it usually works. And also at the same time, some people do say, oh, how about, it has highest heal efficiency. It heals a lot. So let me give you that 1 bubble here. If I show you here, 60,000 HP, right? If I do 1 bubble, the heal amount itself, due to the spec, it's high enough. That's 1 bubble heal. It still heals it to full. So the heal amount is not that bad. No expert needed, yeah, no expert needed. As long as you have conviction judgment, it's like the least mana problems. Now let's talk about the cons. Oh, so I talked about the cons while I talked about the pros too, right? Longest empty time frames, often so large to provide less buffs. And you get heavily punished if you make mistakes. So imagine you're using your Heavenly Tune and you get hit and it gets cancelled. You're giving no buffs for 18 seconds unless you kind of put down your sound vibration on. Because a support's mistake is that much buff for 3 DPS players. If 1 DPS player misses a skill, if the 2 other DPS players have landed, that's fine. But if a support messes up their buffs, all 3 of them do less damage. So the impact is actually bigger than you think. Another con is Spirit Absorption is mandatory. Why is this mandatory? It's because if you have high spec, you don't have max movement speed. You don't have max movement speed. You have about 130. If you can eat the food, maybe it's gonna be 135 or 133.5 because if you eat the feast. Even if some guys are saying, supports can be slow, it's fine. I within so many plays that I've done, I think support being slow is not that great. Otherwise, if you guys don't think it this way, it's the same thing. But most of the time, this is why specialization is a very mandatory engraving for a spec bard. Now, very important, requires high level gems. If you don't have less than level 9 gems, you are actually not doing any better than these two builds above, high swift and then full swift. So the verdict here is, if you see a full spec bard with like, let's say level 5 gem, I'd rather take 4 DPS. They're actually that useless. I don't think they're good at all because their downtime is so long and they don't even give you the shield support in this right amount of time. This is why spec variant becomes expensive. You need that high level gem to keep that up. Again, this is important because let's go back to the beginning. The fundamentals that I taught you guys. What's most important to keep in mind for bard or supports is 100% uptime on attack buffs, 100% uptime on marking, 100% uptime on shields, and then gather identity for juice, right? What's good here is just juice part. And the time difference, to be honest, 21 to 24 second difference between 27 to 31 or 28 to 32, but one of them has 100% uptime on shields and attack buffs, and they generate just this enough, and the efficiency is not that bad. I don't understand why you would play Spec Bard in the first place. That's why I always say Spec Bard is recommended on specific situations, or if you're a Bard main, happen to have high level gems already, you can save money and then go full spec if you want to. Hallmark low level raid reclears, this is really good. And heavy burst class DPS teams like Ignition Sork, Barrage Artillerist, BT Zerk works as well. And then Execution Slayer and Surge DB. Now, that's why I did explain it to you, the full swift, high swift, and full spec build, right? Now, engravings, right? Engravings is super simple because I think I covered most of the important part. I think most of you guys understand this by the time you guys see this video to this point. I hope you guys know it. Now, let's talk about engravings really quickly. We have mandatory engravings, right? Let's think of it this way. Class Awakening Expert is just the mandatory stuff. Generally, most supports go Class Awakening Expert, and then you have two choices. You have like either Drops of Ether, Vital Point, and other stuff. There's not that many choices, as you guys know. So coming back, Drops versus Vital Point. Vital Point helps you on the stagger mechanics. So for those of you guys who tried Vital Point, the stagger mechanics become much easier, and it will become much easier because you just do that much more stagger. Therefore, you're not going to wipe. As for drops, people who really like Drops of Ether, because some DPS players really like drops. People do say they don't pick it up, so it kind of feels like a useless engraving. That's why it's an additional engraving. So drops, and then you have Vital Point. These are preference engravings, as in like, these two are like the cherry on top. But let's talk about heavy armor real quick. This one, earlier today, I played a con hard at almost item level because I'm at 1604. A con is 1600. I went in there with heavy armor 1. It hurts. But it's not unbearable. Heavy armor 3 is actually really comfortable because Bard needs to play aggressive. As in, you gotta get close and then land your win the music close to them, or Prelude of Storm. Now, my idea for this swiftness was, since you have 100% uptime on the shields, right? You have 100% uptime on the shields and the defensive DRs. The lack of heavy armor kind of gets negated with the shield and the Guardian tune that you get to spam. Because if you don't have max MP, you can't rotate skills as fast as you can. You will run out of mana eventually. Max MP, you can spam as fast as you can. All right, and then that means you can rotate as much as you can. And therefore, you're going to be having a DR most of the time and a shield most of the time. If you're dodging because you're, afraid of getting hit, that's more time that you're wasting on dodging. That's how I kind of feel sometimes when I play, right? If the hit is not going to paralyze you, sometimes you got to take the hit and then just get that meter. Like, if you play, especially in a con too, like if I just get that meter right away I can heal it back. You know what I mean? So like if you focus on dodging, I guess to me that kind of sounds like that's a role for a DPS. Like I said, dodging is worth it. But for someone like a support, you have something like a Rhapsody, you know, you're shielded, and you have to be close for these kind of situation. So heavy armor 1 is not that much of a critical thing for me. This is why the characteristics of people who are saying heavy armor is bad on Bard is, you know, people who are confident on dodging, right? Which is really good, because if you're really good at dodging, it's good for you. So if you happen to take away the heavy armor and take all the 5 engravings, you know, max MP, vital point, all that stuff, if that works for you, great. But to me, I would honestly suggest you guys to do heavy armor 3 and then go down to 1 when you guys have an ancient accessory a lot more available, so you have more accessories to buy to get heavy armor level 1. That's when I would like suggest to try, because by the time ancient accessories coming out, and by the time you switch your build, you will be a lot more experienced in the raid, and you'll get hit a lot less, because sometimes you don't want to just straight up die. Since the support's lives are much more important in a later point in the game, heavy armor 3 to me, even if you are so confident on dodging everything, you're really good, dodge everything, all that stuff, I would still put that as like an insurance. I mean, that's my opinion, but this is like a good reference point for you guys to decide what your preferences are, right? Oh, a good point. Someone in chat also mentioned, if you play a Spec Bard, you have to use March for the meter gain, right? So you gotta be close to the guy like this. Like you're kind of like, what if you get hit? What, you know? Another good question on the chat too. Isn't Crisis Evasion 1 better than Heavy Armor level 1? The problem is Crisis Evasion sounds great, but no one's going to wait 15 minutes for you, because the cooldown's 15 minutes. If you get hit and then you get to live once, if that is the case, Heavy Armor can survive that as well. And if it's a mechanic based, you will probably have to reset anyway, because someone in the party would be dead. It's so rare to see only you is receiving like the big damage and coming back alive to heal. Another good point. That's what Saint Tone uses. So he uses Crisis Evasion to know what mechs you can time stop. That's exactly what Saint Tone does, and that's why this kind of engraving is not your main, but your sub engraving. As in, like, you can have an additional accessory on your arsenal to move back and forth to test it out. Like, those kind of play is definitely possible as long as you plan out your engravings really well. That's like the thing I kind of wanted to stress out. Lastly, let's take a look at the MP engraving, MP related engravings. So the new skill Sonatine costs 533 mana at level 10. So I assume that, okay, this skill is very good. I showed you guys know this skill is super amazing, and then it's going to come out very soon. People are going away from it because it costs so much mana. And then I thought to myself, well, why don't we just get max MP and then lower heavy armor? Another one is a Magic Stream. But I think Magic Stream is not recommended due to Bard requires you to be close to the boss, because often tank hits too with Rhapsody as well. So how Magic Stream works is, if you wait, it gives you a stack. Mana recovery is increased by 3%, increased by 12. It increased by 15. And if it's increased by 15, which is the full stack, you get additional 10% cooldown. But if you get hit, your stack is erased. Therefore, it goes to ×4, and ×3, ×2, and ×1. So recovery is percentage based, chat. That's why it's also another thing. You know, Slayer is lacking mana right now because it's a new class. The only reason why Slayer is lacking mana is because they're not level 60 yet. The mana pool is too small, and the recovery is percentage based. Does that make sense? It's percentage based, but the skill usage is flat. If the pool is small, the percentage recovery doesn't really mean anything. This is why this is trash. And this engraving is very good if we don't get hit. Magic Stream is very, very good on Paladin. Why? Because Paladin doesn't need to get hit at all. Paladin doesn't need to get close to the boss at all too. Now let's conclude, guys. So then this is my new build, right? I'm explaining it again. It's a 5-3 and a 1 with level 1 heavy armor. It can also be like this, which is 5-3s with max MP3. And my vital point can be switched from drops as well. So it can be drops, vital point, or I can go level 3 heavy armor. That's my new build. And this is full Swift. This build, to me, is so good. I've always thought it was a waste of combat stat. I actually tried it in a con. I actually tried it in like hard bro. Since it was up so fast to a point that, let's say she's doing a mechanic or whatever, right? I'm just standing around. Everything's all ready to go. It's like everything's just ready all the time. And I think as a support, since you're a utility class, your utility should always be ready to go. That's my thought process on being a support. And when people are trying to do DPS, your buffs should always be ready. Always. And then when you're gathering a meter, it used to be so slow. I thought swiftness bar was not that good because of the meter game, but we have a new skill now. We have a new skill to a point that the generation skill for 3 bubble, it's only like 1 or 2 second difference. Therefore, I will rather take the comfort, the versatility, than like switching 1 or 2 accessories to spec, which is a cheaper build, which is very nice. You can make it cheaper. But I want to play the most comfortable build that I can do the best at based on my skill variances, because everyone can't play perfectly all the time. If this build helps me, regardless if I play like shit or play like God, that can be like, it will also help if I play it better, but if I play bad, it will still be good enough for the team to be very effective to the whole raid, right? Spec Bard example, you need Spirit Assertion, drops or vital point, and then heavy armor expert can be flipped in preference. So this can be completely removed, but I wouldn't put expert level 3. That's a waste. If you remove this, so an actual 5-3 example will be this being vital point or drops of ether, but if you're focusing spec bard, you're focusing everything on damage, so I guess drop is better because you're not usually doing mechanics at this point. You're just your job is to give as much damage buffs as possible, and you kind of remove everything. Yep. Heavy armor being 1, and then expert can be 3 as well for, you know, more efficiency and shielding, etc. So solid build, I recommend. Same thing. This is the same thing, chat. What I just recommend was, you know, the max MP, right? It's cheaper. I think max MP is pretty cheap. It's a pretty cheap engraving. I think trying this out is a very good example. And if you happen to have 4-3 though, you know, just remove max MP. If you can have 5-3, I think this is a really good engraving choice to just get the full swiftness and then try it out. Okay, so before the conclusion, right? This is a new skill build that I use. You can also play the old build with the sound shock, because sound shock is a one marking skill. You just use 1, but you can't really use Sonatine because even if you have max MP, eat food or whatever, you will still run out of mana, because this thing, if you have it as level 10, 315 like every like 6 seconds. So you kind of run out, and then you spend like 533 every 8 seconds. So benefit of using sound shock is you have an option to choose like more utility skills. So you can have Rhapsody. If you really love Rhapsody, you can add it in there. If you want more stagger, you can add Sound Holic, like those kind of options that you can put in. And then you have utility skills. So that's like the bottom line of Bard. So I wanted to cover that at the very last because that's what it did. And the changes that happened to my build or the playstyle, and I've tried it just recently on a con hard. So I'm more confident on this particular build now is, using the skill set with the 2 marking, with full swiftness, with the engraving that can be changeable. And this can be changed into less swift and then a little bit more spec. They're like about the same. They're all about the same. I covered it in detail on the differences, and then you can scroll back again. So I think that's it, chat. That was a very long chat about Bard, the Bard class. Then the reason why I had this, because every day I stream, I think more and more people are getting interested in Bard, is because this when supports to get really important. Broshaza Heart comes out, supports will be even more important. And when Kangale comes out, support's going to be even more. A con, you have to reset if support dies. It's like, it's up to that point. The role of a support becomes more and more important because it's their job to make the DPS classes stronger. and I saved them with shields and everything. Okay. So with that being said, this concludes the bar talk. Now I can finally, when I stream, I can forward anybody who asks about any Bard question, because it's so random, like it's so specific. I lied it down. I hope that if you watch this, you will get enough knowledge to a point that you can figure it out yourself for sure. Because I'm pretty sure most of you guys are very smart. And I just wanted to summarize everything so that I can locate to people who have a general questions about it to just one video. So I think we had a really good time talking about the whole thing here, right? So, cool. Again, with that being said, this concludes the video. All right, thank you guys. Bye-bye.